Good day, everyone. It's Kavi Singh from McGill Emergency Medicine. I'm here to discuss training, performance under pressure, and getting emergency medicine up to speed. This is a recording of a talk that I gave at the International Conference of Emergency Medicine in 2025 and was requested to record it for those who were not able to attend. My background, I started working up in rural and remote Canada 25 years ago and very quickly found that my skill set was inadequate for acute care and resuscitation up north. So for 10 years, I ended up doing a competency-based residency essentially on my own time and dime. Then went back to do an EM fellowship to, in part, test myself and also in part to start to influence the way curriculum is designed and taught. I am currently director of Resus at McGill EM. A lot of my thinking has been shaped by other disciplines that I'm involved in, such as whitewater kayaking, combat sports, and mountaineering. I have a lot of people to thank who have shaped my thinking over the years. Scott Weingart at MCRIT, who told me that he also thought there was a place to really develop foundational resuscitation. Tracy B at Skillstat out west, who showed me that other people think like me. Rich Levitan and George Kovacs, who, apart from their airway teaching, really taught me a philosophy of dealing with adversity. My colleagues up where I work, Rosie Raffi, Phil Gillich, who is my brother by another mother, and Major Richard Granger, who introduced us, and Joe Namath, who's always pushing me to do more and do better, and most of all, my wife. The objectives: learn a better way to train acute care, and really the goal is to change the paradigm of how acute medical simulation and training is done. So let's get started. Let's imagine you are standing about 10 feet in front of a very large soccer net and you have a regular size soccer ball. And I ask you to kick that ball into that net. At the conference, I asked people who thought it would be hard and thought it would be easy. Most people tended to agree that it would be a fairly easy thing to do. And for proof of that, let's take a look. See that kicking a small object into a relatively large space is easy to do, nothing complicated there. So part one, performance under pressure. Now, many of you may or may not know Cristiano Ronaldo. He is a soccer player and he gets paid about $285 million, I believe, a year to essentially kick a soccer ball into a net. Now, the paradox is we all just agreed that kicking a small ball into a big space like a soccer net is not complicated. So why does this guy get paid $285 million a year? Let's take a look.
It's Ronaldo. Oh, brilliantly done. We look again at Ronaldo forcing a save out of Lafuente.
Ronaldo. Oh, great skills by Ronaldo. Twisting and turning away from Steve Davis.
Ronaldo. It's just naughty, isn't it, really? Jota.
Here is Ronaldo again.
Wieder die Pfiffe gegen ihn, gegen Cristiano Ronaldo.
They get a third goal to really round it off. Ronaldo, lovely footwork. Van Nistelrooy, oh, what a goal that would have been.
Ronaldo.
Of course, has had a good scoring season himself with a couple of Premier League hat-tricks. This is the man.
So you just witnessed some of the best performance under pressure that exists on the planet. And what we saw is that this is my definition of performance under pressure. He was demonstrating an extremely high level of skill with the defenders, the best soccer players in the world, we might add, trying to stop him from doing so, take the ball from him. There was a time constraint, and there's a consequence. If he loses the game, there's a lot of money on the line. Now, we can take this principle and ask ourselves, who here intubates? And in the audience last week, a lot of people did. And I wanted to point out that intubation requires putting a small object into quite a small space. And in fact, sometimes that space is invisible. And we have all the elements of performance under pressure here. The consequence is very high if we don't succeed. A lot of skill, because that airway is often obstructed by blood, secretions, or swelling. And there's a time constraint. Often we have hypoxia, hypotension, respiratory failure that are making the time go by very quickly. Now, none of us are probably paid $285 million a year to do this, and that may or may not be the right thing, but I think we can all agree that what we do is pretty priceless. So let's take a little bit of a look at how we train performance under pressure. I asked at the conference who wanted to suck at resus, and exactly 0 people put their hands up. I then asked who wanted to pursue excellence, and the majority of people did put their hands up. And so what we do in medicine to try and get better for these types of scenarios is we simulate. We do simulation from A to E, then we debrief the simulation, trying to find where things went better, where things could be improved, what things went well, and then we repeat the process. And what's interesting is when you go watch someone like Ronaldo play, or for that matter, the world's best hockey team, they don't tend to do the equivalent. They don't play games, debrief, and then play games again. They actually practice quite differently. And if you look at the left, Ronaldo there over the yellow bars is essentially practicing walking. In the middle slide, he's practicing his shot, which he shoots every day and has shot a soccer ball thousands and thousands and thousands of times, yet he's still practicing how to shoot. And on the right, we see agility training. So there's a bit of a paradox there. No other serious performance under pressure discipline practices exactly like the way we do in medical sim. And that got me to thinking, well, why is that? Hockey Canada actually has some statistics for this, and they've shown that one efficient practice gives a player more skill than 11 games played collectively. And that's because for any given game, time with puck on stick is literally less than 10 seconds a game, and you might only get a couple of shots on net. And I think the rule or the lesson to take away from this is that expertise really cannot be reliably nor efficiently or effectively developed by doing full cycle games or simulations. And what we end up experiencing in medicine, I think, is missing the forest for the trees. About 6 months ago, there was a message passed on from Andrew Petrosoniak, who is an emergent physician in Toronto, who was playing with something called radical transparency in his simulations. And what that entailed was letting people know what the exact problem was. No mystery. We're going to tell you what the pathology is. And this created a lot of debate in the McGill listserv, people wondering whether this was a good approach or a bad approach, whether it was enhancing ability or decreasing ability. And on the one hand, I was really happy to hear this debate happening. And on the other hand, I felt some consternation because I really don't think there's anything wrong with radical transparency. And I think we need to go even much, much, much further. And the reason is in medicine, we have a very strong emphasis on an endpoint focus. We want to have the result, save the patient, find the diagnosis, do the right thing. But when you look outside of medicine, everyone else who engages in performance under pressure is really process focused because that's ultimately where the true money is. If you have a good result, but your process is not good, then you failed. You were strictly lucky. If you have a good or bad outcome, but the process is good, that actually is the definition of success. And if you look at why that is, why does medicine train a bit differently? There's one striking thing that pops up. In medicine, if you fail, someone else dies. And if you're a test pilot and you fail, you die. Now, the medical and healthcare staff that I work with are some of the most dedicated, compassionate, and driven people in the world. Yet, there is something that fundamentally changes your motivation on how quickly and efficiently you want to become better when it's your life that's on the line. So let's take a look at how this applies in real life and what we train. On the left, you see the stacks of the library, and the vast knowledge we accumulate in medicine is amazing for letting us show up at a shift, diagnose cerebral malaria, then 5 minutes later, a shoulder rotator cuff tendonitis, then 2 minutes later, a Crohn's disease, and 5 minutes later, enuresis in a pediatric patient. This amazing breadth and depth of knowledge, however, is exactly the kind of training that becomes counterproductive in a performance under pressure situation. And what we see on the right is literally a data tsunami that drowns us when we're trying to perform. If you do a search of the literature, you'll find that cognitive overload is often described as what happens when we're put under pressure. On the left, we see the triad of consequence, skill, and time. All that pressure and stress leads to cognitive overload, and ultimately we have a performance failure. Now, one thing I think we can take from medicine is our ability to actually deep dive and really analyze these things. And so what I've come up with is a more detailed picture of this that actually will let us break down strategically how to actually get better. Now, cognitive overload obviously arises because of the pressure and the stress, but there's other things that influence it. If our workplace is disorganized, equipment is poorly laid out, our communication systems are not good, then we suffer an external data tsunami. And if the information that's organized within our heads is not optimized for performance under pressure, we will suffer an internal data tsunami. These three things conspire to give us cognitive overload. The result of that is we can't really keep track of what's happening around us or what's changing, and we have a loss of situational awareness. Loss of situational awareness leads to decision ability failing because garbage in leads to garbage out. Once our decision ability starts to fail, then we start to see errors, omissions, and commissions, and ultimately performance failure. Now, one thing to note is that mistakes made early on get amplified downstream. So if you don't know what's going on early on, then you cannot make good decisions, and then ultimately your performance failure comes back to bite you. And we'll start to see that performance failure itself leads to cognitive overload, which worsens situational awareness. And as this process goes on, things start to degrade catastrophically, and the train starts to derail not only faster, but more spectacularly. So, what can we do about this? Well, let's take a look and just isolate one aspect of cognitive overload, the internal data tsunami, and we'll take a look at what we train. Now, anyone who's ever had to do their ACLS research, advanced cardiac life support, probably has had to deal with the stress of dealing with this table while you have a crashing patient in front of you. And I know that personally, for many, many years, I would go through this cycle of trying to get all this stuff memorized and remember it, and 3 weeks later be unable to really reproduce it. And there's a better way to do it. So what I've developed is what's called a performance filter. Now, the best but worst piece of advice I got in my career was to keep things simple. Just keep it simple, stupid. And while I thought the advice was valuable, no one was really able to operationalize it for me. And so for the last 10 years, we've been working on how to operationalize this. And we've come up with an actual specific system that is situation agnostic. You can be a military test pilot, you can be an astronaut, you can be a chef in a Michelin kitchen, you can be a dog catcher, or you can be a resuscitationist. The process is the same. We're going to triage your knowledge. We have specific criteria to prune it. We're going to mate it to your workflow. And then we're going to make it actually functional and easy for you to remember. So what it ends up looking like is this. This is a summary of ACLS. If it's not moving, you need to make it move. If it's too slow, you need to speed it up. And if it's too fast, you need to slow it down. In each case, you use electricity or drugs. And if ever things are really bad and things are unstable, you use electricity. This is a kissed version of ACLS. People will be able to use this better and get results faster. We can do the same thing with shock. Instead of memorizing H's and T's and then trying to run through the list and never remembering which ones you've gotten, we can actually do a visual process mnemonic like this, where it's precardiac, cardiac, and postcardiac. And then we can actually mate this to our task and workflow, which is our CABCDs, and we can even mate it to pathophysiology. And this allows us to cycle through the H's and T's more accurately, more effectively, more efficiently, with less errors. Now let's take a quick look at how we train. This is probably one of the most important slides of this presentation. Amateurs practice until they get it right, and professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. And I really think this is true. Let's talk a little bit about OODA loops. OODA loops were designed to describe the decision-making process by John Boyd, a military fighter pilot from the United States. And this is a very simplified version. We have a stimulus and a response. Cookie Monster observes that, me hungry. He orients himself to, me like cookie. He decides, me decide, gonna eat cookie. And then he acts, nom 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 nom. And this is essentially what fighter pilots do, what resuscitationists do, what firefighters do, what professional athletes do. There's many layers of complication to this. We won't get into those. But if we look at how we train, we can actually start to break this down. Now, this is a grid that I've developed where I actually use this to score people when we're running simulations, to use as a coaching guide to figure out where we can work on improving things. Now, before we start using this whole grid, though, we focus on one aspect of it, and that is just the information gathering aspect of it. And before running through any kind of full simulation, we will spend a day just running through information gathering. We're using the process of graded stress progression, short feedback loops. And the first thing you show me is that you can do basic information gathering with no emissions. Once you're able to do that consistently, we're going to start to add some distractors to make it a little bit more difficult for you. We'll maybe add a bit of time pressure with no consequence. And then as you start to show that you're able to perform, then we start to add complications. We may add a difficult airway, we may add hypotension. As you get even better, then we start to add complexity and give you dilemmas where we force you to make decisions and confront you with having to do things out of order. But you still have to have the same bottom line performance. You have to have no omissions. And we practice this until you cannot fail, until you do not get anything wrong. And we progressively push you further and further until you're able to do it. The same thing can happen for interventions. Prior to running the whole simulation, once we've done the orientation aspect, we'll focus on the decision and action aspect. And we'll do the same thing. We'll run you through graded stress progressions and ask you to deal with, for example, an airway in difficulty. We'll want you to demonstrate you can do the basic maneuvers. Then once that's happening, we're going to add complications and we're going to build troubleshooting into your response so that it's not a surprise when things start to go wrong. And as you get better, we start to make things even harder and harder. And we're trying to debalance you and find out where things go wrong. And as soon as we find out where things go wrong, we fix it and we go back and do it again. We add failure drills once we're in a good psychologically safe space, and we'll start to add constrained practice as well to really push your depth of knowledge. And just to show you that this is not random, this is a really systematized, organized fashion that actually lets us develop individual goals based on your score breakdown and give really someone specific advice and coaching on how they can get better. Now, what we've just talked about is the bottom circle, the red circle at the bottom, and that's your own abilities and skills. But this process, the performance filter, actually can be applied to the space you work in and the interaction between the environment, the tools, the team, and the patient. And we actually systematically apply this to all aspects of the resuscitation so that instead of reading 10,000 papers on resus improvement tip of the week, we can actually start to generate a coherent strategic approach on how to get better and do a bit of a 20/80 analysis on where to spend most of our time. So let's start to wrap this up and talk a little bit about culture. Medicine has a complicated relationship with failure. We are afraid of making mistakes, of killing people, of looking bad, of failing. We don't want to fail to make the diagnosis or do a successful procedure. And what we don't fundamentally understand is that failure is part of the mastery process. We need to fail, but we also need to do it strategically. And the strategic time to do it is during practice, where we enhance performance while we minimize cost. A couple of months ago, I had the fortune of training with Roger Gracie, who is many would consider the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor of all time. And we spent 4 days, a group of us rolling on the mats, trying different techniques. It was a limited number of things, and at the end of 4 days, what he said was very striking. If I had done a 4-day airway course, I feel like at the end of that course, I would be told, okay, you've had 4 days of airway training, you're ready to go out and do it now. And Roger's advice to us was very different. He said, we've been working for 4 days, and you actually don't know anything yet. You understand the basic concepts at best. You have a vague understanding of it. Now you need to get out there and try it and fail and then fix it and fail and fix it some more. And it's going to take you months and months and months with regular practice. And this was really a different way of looking at things. It's practicing until you cannot fail as opposed to practicing until you get it right. Medical simulation often gives us experience that's a mile wide, but only an inch deep. But when you have a difficult airway that's hemorrhagic or swollen and has a false tract in it, what you need is experience that's a mile deep and not just an inch wide. Ultimately, there's many things that can go wrong. And so what we want to develop is expertise that is mastery wide and mastery deep. What we're trying to build in this training paradigm is robustness so that you don't get knocked off the horse easily, but also resilience, because if you engage in resus, it's a full contact sport. You will absolutely fall off your horse, and we will train you to get back on efficiently and quickly. And once you're robust and resilient, then you start to have the space of mind and place of mind to be able to be agile, to stand on your feet or even do a somersault and keep track of things while they're happening. And in a situation where we have limited time and resources for resus, this is something that's potentially very interesting. We're talking about an order of magnitude savings from the Hockey Canada study. I was recently asked at a Trauma Association of Canada presentation I was doing, well, this is interesting. You've described some ways to get better for austere resus, but what does this have to do with someone working in an urban center? And I don't think I answered the question very well, but the actual response is it doesn't matter who you are or where you work. We can always try to get better. Cristiano Ronaldo, during his practice, is actually practicing walking, not just playing soccer. So we all can benefit. And I would also add that anyone who engages in emergency medicine is at any given time potentially put in the situation of being in a code orange or a mass casualty incident where you will be stressed beyond your abilities and your systems will be stressed beyond their abilities. And this type of training will set you up for that type of success. Now, excellence isn't just about doing training sessions, getting knowledge and some skills, because that often doesn't translate super well into actual competency. We were discussing developing a new simulation program up where I work. And at some point, I said to the partners I was working with, it's good, but you need to decide whether you want to practice sim or whether you actually want to get better, because the two are not necessarily the same and they can be mutually exclusive. In medicine, we generally are trying to have a culture of inclusion, which is good. And we've tried to seek performance, which often has veered off into a culture of harassment, which is not good. Generally, I would say we focus on a culture of quality, but what's missing is a culture of excellence where we really have sustained high performance and people doing well. And that requires a change in mindset. We need to have leadership and vision, but also to develop a coaching mindset as opposed to just an evaluation mindset. So the bottom line, what we train and how we train can be improved. And the reason to do it is because we get greater ability and we get that ability in a faster way. And I think this is one step in the direction of changing the paradigm of how acute care simulation is taught in medicine. And that's it. You can get a hold of me by email, performunderpressure@proton.me. I'm not huge on social media, but the social media contacts are there. And please feel free to reach out. More and more of us are thinking like this, and you will be seeing more and more for many of us as we start to spread the message. Thanks very much. Have a good day.